Good morning. It is Monday, September the 23rd, and this is The Drill. Thank you very much. I'm Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, because I'm the only one who is who makes the presumption for the status quo. In other words, I ask, what's wrong with the way things are? This as opposed to reactionary traditionalists like Rush Limbaugh, who resist change at all costs. My podcast is about being a true conservative and using true conservatism to beat the left each and every day. My podcast is made possible by Spreaker.com. It can be heard on iTunes, Spotify, Google, and YouTube. My email address is ronaldhardgrove@hotmail.com, and my address on Twitter is @RonaldHardgrove. And on Facebook, I'm at The Drill. Started my socio-political odyssey as a conservative Republican and then became a card-carrying member of the Libertarian Party. I'm now a registered independent and a true conservative. I was taught by the left how to dress, how to act, what to take seriously, and who to associate with. When I decided to vote Republican, I thought that I could act like a liberal but vote conservative and still consider myself a conservative. In other words, have my cake and eat it too. I was wrong. Whenever I engaged a liberal in debate, I couldn't win. And I couldn't win in part because I couldn't be taken seriously and because I didn't understand the debate dynamic between left and right. I talked conservative, but I acted left. I used lefty lingo, I dressed like the left, and I engaged in petty vice and associated with people who engaged in vice. People who used drugs, gambled, consorted with prostitutes, stole, and cheated. I failed to recognize that the debate dynamic was between psychology, things that are imaginary, and philosophy, things that are real. It was no wonder that people around me didn't take me seriously. So I realized that defeating the liberals and socialists starts by getting my act together, by not only voting conservative, but by talking, dressing, and acting conservative, by refusing to associate with common criminals and ne'er-do-wells, by being aware of and resisting left-wing counterculture, and by using my intellect to defeat psychological bullying and intimidation. By becoming a true conservative, I will not only win, I will never lose. And the purpose of my broadcast is to share with my audience the lessons I have learned on how to defeat the left each and every day. And so today I am going to explain why Marxism and the left are dead, explore the motives of the Democrats in the Joe Biden affair, and continue reading Chapter 4 of A False Kind of Christianity by Dan Jensen when I come back. Welcome back. Marxism and post-Marxism are dead. They both died in the 1960s. Marxism is the narrative created by Karl Marx that predicts the ultimate triumph of Marxism, communism, socialism over capitalism. Marxism was considered for many decades to be intellectually unassailable, criticism-proof. In the 1960s, frustrated Marxists created critical theory and post-Marxism as an answer to the question, where is the revolution? Of course, as soon as post-Marxism was created, Marxism died. If Marxism was flawed, then there was no reason to be dedicated to it. If there's no dedication, then there is no way to create or sustain a revolutionary movement. Without Marxism, post-Marxism becomes a self-destructive amalgam of competing pressure groups. And the job of the right, therefore, is not to stop socialism, but simply to bury it. And when I come back, the Democrats' efforts in the Joe Biden affair. Thank you very much. Welcome back. The mission of the left is not to destroy capitalism, but to get capitalism to destroy itself. As far as the left is concerned, the President of the United States is the capitalist in chief and must go. Destroying, i.e. impeaching, the president is the last resort. The preferred outcome is the resignation of President Trump. The resignation serves two purposes. First, it gets rid of President Trump while allowing the left to run their re-election campaigns with clean hands. The clean hands doctrine is very important. It's very difficult to get reelected if you're walking around with blood on your hands. In other words, that you've gone ahead and politically assassinated somebody. Second, a resignation by the president acts as a confession that all of the criticism of him was correct. In order to get a resignation or confession out of President Trump, the left intends to create maximum pressure that includes constant calls for his impeachment. This is where the right often goes wrong, trying to explain why it is that the president should not be impeached. The Joe Biden affair is the latest such effort on the part of the left. If you believe the news media, not recommended, the president asked the Ukrainian government to investigate the former vice president's manipulative and coercive behavior with regard to American loans to the Ukraine, and the left sees subterfuge and an opportunity to renew calls for impeachment of President Trump. True conservatives must not be fooled. They must not be explaining why it is the president shouldn't be impeached. Instead, they should call the left's bluff and immediately demand that Nancy Pelosi and company put up or shut up. We dare you to impeach President Trump. When I return, I will continue reading Chapter 4 of Dan Jensen's book, A False Kind of Christianity. Thank you very much. Welcome back. And now I will continue Chapter 4 of A False Kind of Christianity, a conservative evangelical refutation of progressive Christianity. And this part of Chapter 4 is called The Basics of Truth. And I wanted to go back and explain what it is we had covered the last time I was reading this book. This chapter is about philosophy and the importance of philosophy in everyday life and the importance of philosophy and philosophical theory in determining truth and falsity, particularly where it comes to religion generally and Christianity specifically. So this section is called The Basics of Truth. Truth is that which corresponds with reality. This is obvious. Everyone knows this deep down and operates with this basic understanding every day, whether they consciously think about it or not. You'd be amazed at just how much philosophical ink has been spilled attacking this basic conception of truth. Again, there are mysteries and difficulties involved here, no question about it, but that cannot negate what we all know to be the case. Whenever we ask a child if they are telling the truth, whenever we go to court and swear to tell the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth, whenever we fill out a job application or a loan application and we sign it saying that our statements are true, everyone knows exactly what is meant when the word truth is used. Section 2, the adequacy of human language. And basically what he's doing here with the basics of truth and whatnot is that he is getting to permanent first principles with which philosophy is basically concerned. So the number one first principle is truth. Second one, the adequacy of human language. Human language, whether spoken, written, or given in sign, is adequate to communicate truth to one another. Once again, this is not intended to deny the massive problems that philosophers have discovered in regard to language and how it works and functions. Those problems are agonizingly difficult to sort through, and I am not in any measure unaware of them. But that, again, does not negate the basic fact that we all still know that we use language every day to adequately communicate with one another. This is also not to say that that all three forms of language communicate equally well. Spoken language is the most effective, written is second, and sign is third. None of this is to say that all people are equal in their communication abilities. They certainly are not. What is being said is simply that language does communicate, and the harder we work at clarification, the more we are able to communicate to each other. The third first principle, the law of non-contradiction. This law states that A cannot be A and not A at the same time and in the same way. The entire definition is very important in order to avoid confusion and possible mistakes in our thinking. Let us make two statements to see, or take two statements to see what I mean. The first statement is, quote, I hate basketball, unquote. Second statement is, quote, I love basketball, unquote. At first glance, these statements seem incompatible and therefore contradictory. However, we have to be very careful when trying to see if we have a contradiction on our hands. Maybe two completely different people made these two statements. If that were the case, then we would not have a case of someone trying to say that A is A and not A, but rather we would have a case of A not being B, because person A hates basketball while person B loves basketball. But let us say the same person made these two statements. Let us also say that this person made the first statement yesterday while the latter statement was made 20 years ago. Perhaps this person loved basketball, but as he or she grew older, they began to hate it. If that were the case, then these two statements are not contradictory. Finally, let us state that these two statements are indeed made by the same person at the same time. But let us also say that this person was saying that there is a sense in which he or she loved basketball, but in a very different sense, he or she also hated basketball. As the reader saw from my story, unless the section was skipped, which is totally okay, I can testify that I could easily make both of those statements right now. I love basketball because it's so much fun, it's a great exercise, produces and fosters friendships, and it is so entertaining to watch. However, in a very different way, I hate basketball because as I get older, I cannot do the things I used to be able to do, and so the game has become very frustrating to me in many ways. Also, as my old idol, it can still creep up on me and I can still become too focused on basketball when God has clearly called me to focus more on other things. That also causes me to hate basketball sometimes. However, if I made these two statements at the same time, made it clear that I was being quite literal and comprehensive in making them, then those two statements would be contradictory and I would be lying. Closely connected to the law of non-contradiction are the two key concepts. They are the concept of mystery and the concept of paradox. It is a favorite sticking point of progressive Christian leaders to consistently accuse Christian evangelical theologians, apologists, and leaders of being against mystery and paradox, so that we can continue to dogmatically assert our doctrines. I cannot be more emphatic when I say that despite the repetitive nature of this accusation, which in the minds of many makes it so convincing, it is completely false and really slanderous. Anyone who's even remotely familiar with the sound Orthodox writers down through the ages of church history, whether ancient teachers, medieval theologians, Catholic or Orthodox, historic Protestant leaders, evangelical writers, or Christian evangelical apologists, knows all too well just how often both of these concepts are constantly invoked and upheld. Progressive Christianity seeks to whitewash this history so that it can defend contradictory and incoherent doctrines or defenses of their doctrines. Do not be duped by the ruse, for that is all that it is. A mystery is something that cannot be fully understood. Now, it is true that this term in Scripture carries with it a much more technical meaning to refer to truths that were previously unrevealed, but that have now been disclosed by God. However, the term in philosophy and theology carries with it the idea of complexity and our only being able to grasp something slightly. The concept of paradox refers to something that appears to be contradictory at first blush, but upon closer examination we see that it is not. Many paradoxes, probably most, are quite mysterious, but not all carry with them any degree of major mystery. All things are mysterious to some extent. Many Christian evangelical theologians do argue that we should not even use the word paradox because in our culture it has largely become a synonym for contradiction. That is a valid in-house debate within Christian evangelicalism, but it is one for another time. Whether we should use the term or not, all Christian evangelical theologians agree that the concept behind the way in which I am using the term is valid philosophically, biblically, and theologically. Using the term as I've defined it here, the Bible is chock full of paradoxes. Most of the greatest Christian doctrines are inherently paradoxical. With that made clear, we must also firmly state that both of these concepts can be horribly abused. Neither concept can be used to assert contradictions, and when challenged, say, quote, "Oh, no, silly, I'm not asserting a contradiction, I'm simply pointing to a mystery and a paradox," unquote. This is done constantly in our culture, and it is one of the sharpest tools in the progressive Christian theologian's bag, as it is so effective with listeners who are unfamiliar with philosophy and theology. If someone does not attempt to show how his or her assertion is not a contradiction, then his or her assertion must be rejected. It is perfectly fine to assert a paradox, including ones that have that leave a vast amount of mystery, but one must also show how the assertion is not a bald contradiction. Allow me to give an example of how this works. The doctrine of the incarnation is a paradox and contains within it a mystery so difficult that it pushes our minds near the breaking point. I am not here stating the truth of the incarnation. That will be proven later in this work. I am simply using the doctrine, whether it is true or not, it is, as we will see, as an example of a doctrine that is not contradictory, but extremely paradoxical and mysterious. The doctrine of the incarnation states that God became flesh. God, in this definition, refers to the traditional Christian doctrine of God that states that he is spirit and is immutable, among many other key attributes. Flesh, in this definition, refers to the traditional Christian doctrine of humankind that states that human beings are made up of at least two component parts that together make up a human nature, mainly a body of physical matter and an immortal soul of spirit. Some would say that we have three component parts, body, soul, and spirit, but all Orthodox Christians have always believed in at least the two components of body and soul. At first glance, this doctrine of incarnation certainly seems to be a contradiction, and if anyone asserted that it seems that way, but it just is not, and we just have to accept the mystery and paradox of it, this individual will be talking nonsense, and we would have an absolute obligation to call him or her out on this nonsense. If God is fundamentally spirit and not flesh, and if he cannot change, then he most certainly cannot become flesh, plain and simple. Therefore, if no qualifications or explanations are given, we cannot accept such a doctrine, and no amount of pleading, mystery, and paradox can change that fact one iota. However, traditional Christian theologians have always provided key caveats when delineating this profound teaching. They have always said very clearly that the way the word became is used in this doctrine is highly, highly nuanced. They've taken painstaking measures to say that what is meant by this word is that God the Son, in his divine nature, added human nature to his divine nature such that he has two natures but remains one person. They further have carefully stated that these two natures are so perfectly and permanently united that the divine nature of God the Son can never be thought of apart from the human nature that was added. So much so that we are warranted in saying that God became the Son, or that God the Son became a human being of flesh and bone and human soul in a very qualified sense. But these same traditional theologians have also been equally careful to say that the divine nature of God the Son did not literally morph into a human being, as that would be a genuine contradiction, given the stated definitions of the words God and flesh in the doctrine. These explanations, qualifications, and caveats all alleviate the charge of contradiction from the traditional Christian doctrine of the incarnation. These theologians are not saying that God cannot change, and yet God did fundamentally change into a human being precisely because that would indeed be a genuine article contradiction. However, the doctrine is still painfully paradoxical and mysterious. How do these two natures perfectly interact with each other, given the monumental gap that exists between infinitude and finitude? No one knows, but that does not change the fact that no contradiction is being asserted, and if someone does not provide a similar justification for why his or her paradoxical and or mysterious assertion is not in point of fact a contradiction, we are not to listen to him or her. And basically what he's saying as an aside here is that not providing the explanation is in effect leaving the statement as arbitrary, and all arbitrary statements must be ignored. Next section, the next article of the next section, law of causality. The first principle, that's what I'm looking for. The next first principle is the law of causality. The fourth first principle we'll examine is the law of causality, or the law of cause and effect. This law states that every entity or action that comes into existence must have had a cause behind it. We all know instinctively that things do not just pop into existence. From nothing, nothing comes. That is a universal axiom. It is important to note that this law does not state that every cause must have a cause. It states that every effect must have a cause. An effect is an entity or action that comes into existence. Something can be both a cause and an effect in different ways. For instance, I'm in an effect as I came into existence, but I also often cause things. When I bounce a ball, I'm causing the ball to bounce, and the bouncing ball is the effect of my causation. Some try to get around the force of this first principle by stating that science has disproven it. Many say that some things in the empirical world seem to go against this law. Many of the same folks also say that a great deal happens by chance and not by the law of causality. In fact, the word chance has become a major buzzword in the secular scientific establishment. No one has done more to refute this ridiculousness than R.C. Sproul, and I highly recommend all of his works on the subject. Chance is not a thing. It is simply a word used to describe mathematical possibilities. It has no power. Hence, it cannot be used as a substitute for causality. And while it is certainly true that there are things in the empirical world that do, from our very limited perspective, seem to defy this law, it is clear that it is only because we do not fully understand all that is going on behind the scenes. People believed in spontaneous generation for centuries until that notion was thoroughly disproven. And it never should have been believed in the first place, because we all instinctively know that the law of causality is inviolable. So one of the things that he's getting to, and one of the reasons that it is important about the law of causality and chance, is one of the theories of the left is that success is based on one of three things: either cheating, getting lucky, or a combination of the two. And that is the basis for their hatred, the left's hatred of successful people and success generally. The fifth basic principle is the basic reliability of sense perception. This principle simply states that while our senses do not give us comprehensive or perfect knowledge of the world by a long shot, they do, for the most part, give us an adequate and fairly accurate picture of the real world outside of ourselves. This means that we know we exist in a real physical world filled with all sorts of very real physical objects. We do not exist in an illusion or a world where our senses are constantly deceiving us. This principle also refers to the fact that we can instinctively recognize design when we see it. There are times when we see something that at first blush seems to be designed, but upon further investigation it either is not or we cannot be entirely sure. This in no way changes the fact that there are certain things upon immediate sight we know beyond doubt are designed. Finally, this principle also refers to the fact that all people can instinctively tell when an event or action is supernatural beyond doubt. It is true that far too often people in their religious zeal try to ascribe all sorts of things to the supernatural, and this was a major problem before the scientific revolution, as we have discussed. However, if people take the time to disengage from sloppy thinking, they will be able to see whether or not something is natural or supernatural. We should always seek a natural explanation first, but when something simply does not admit of natural explanation, we should not hesitate to call it supernatural. And when something is clearly supernatural, we call that a miracle. The basics of deduction. Deduction refers to drawing inferences based on previously established premises. The inference is not stated explicitly, but if the premises are true, then the inference or conclusion follows as a matter of course, even though it has not up until that time been made explicitly clear. And I'm going to go ahead and stop right at this point, because it's going to be a long section here on deduction. And so I again, chapter 4 is a very important chapter in this book because it explains philosophy and the importance of philosophy in everyday life. And understanding, if you understand some of these philosophical issues, you better understand politics and culture and understand the central, deeper issues of a lot of culture and political issues. Back in a minute. Thank you very much. Welcome back. In conclusion, I've explained the death of Marxism, the latest impeachment bluff by the left, and reinforced the importance of philosophy and philosophical theory by reading from Chapter 4 of A False Kind of Christianity. All of the subjects I've covered today are subjects that could and should be covered by Rush Limbaugh and his ilk. Who is the true conservative? He's the person that understands that conservatism is not just political, but cultural as well. He is patriotic and uses common sense. He makes judgments, refuses to speculate, speaks clearly and definitively, and is not afraid to say no. He's open-minded, asking why rather than why not. He is unafraid to learn or correct his mistakes. He is a normal American. And that brings me to the conclusion of another episode of The Drill. Thank you for listening, and have a great day.